"Excuse me, sir, but I think you're in the wrong place." The voice was young, slick, with the unearned confidence of a fraternity pledge. It cut through the low hum of the Oak Barrel Diner, a place of worn vinyl booths, and the comforting smell of coffee and fried onions. Raymond Clark, 84 years old, did not look up immediately. He took a slow, deliberate sip from his thick ceramic mug, the warmth of familiar comfort in his gnarled hands. He sat alone in a booth meant for four, a solitary island of calm. The young man, a college kid with a deliberately messy haircut and a brand-name sweatshirt, cleared his throat louder this time. "Hello, sir. This is our table." Finally, Raymond raised his head. His eyes, the color of winter steel, were calm and unwavering. He wore a deep blue VFW blazer, the fabric worn soft with decades of wear. On the breast pocket, a neat row of service medals caught the overhead light, each one a testament to battles fought and brothers lost. A matching garrison cap sat perfectly centered on his silver hair. He looked at the twum, then at the two friends flanking him, their faces arranged in expressions of practiced superiority. "Is your name carved into this table, son?" Raymond asked, his voice carrying the gravel of age and authority. The boy's confident smirk flickered. "Funny," he shot back, his voice rising slightly. "No, but everyone who works here knows this is where we sit every Tuesday. We're regulars. We actually spend money here. So are you going to move, or do we need to make this difficult?" His friend Kevin, tall and gangly with the posture of someone who'd never worked a hard day, leaned over the booth's edge. "Yeah, old-timer. The early bird crowd cleared out hours ago. Maybe it's past your bedtime." The third member of their group, a girl named Jessica with carefully styled hair and a phone perpetually raised, had already begun recording. She zoomed in on Raymond's weathered face, then panned down to his uniform jacket. "Oh my God," she said loudly enough for her video audience. "This is actually perfect. Look at this guy in his little military costume, just camping out like he owns the place. It's giving major main character energy, but not in a good way." The word costume landed like a slap. Several nearby diners shifted uncomfortably, their conversations faltering. An older couple in the adjacent booth deliberately turned away, suddenly fascinated by their untouched meals. The young waitress, Brenda, stood frozen near the kitchen entrance, her hands twisting her apron into knots, clearly torn between intervening and keeping her job. Raymond said nothing. He simply returned his mug to its saucer with a soft clink that somehow cut through the tension. He had stared down enemy positions across frozen Korean valleys. He had carried wounded men through waist-deep snow while bullets tore the air around him. These children with their phones and their utter cruelty were nothing more than a passing inconvenience. But there was something deeper stirring in the diner now, something uglier than simple rudeness. Chad saw the manager emerging from the back office and seized his opportunity. "Hey, manager dude," he called out, waving his hand like he was hailing a cab. "We've got a serious problem here. This guy is refusing to give up our table, and honestly, he's making my friends really uncomfortable." Mr. Henderson scurried over, his cheap tie slightly askew, sweat already beading on his forehead despite the diner's air conditioning. He was perhaps 25, thrust into management by necessity rather than qualification, and confrontation made his stomach churn. "What seems to be the trouble, folks?" he asked weakly, his eyes darting between the imperious students and the stone-faced elderly man who sat with the stillness of a monument. "The trouble," Chad said, his voice dripping with practiced indignation, "is that this man has been squatting in our booth for over 2 hours. He's making people uncomfortable. He's taking up space that paying customers need, and when we politely asked him to move, he got hostile." Jessica lowered her phone just enough to affect a wounded expression. "He was definitely staring at me earlier," she added, her voice smaller now, calculated. It made me feel really unsafe. The accusation hung in the air, a manufactured weapon designed for maximum effect. Mr. Henderson's already weak resolve crumbled completely under the weight of that carefully crafted lie. He turned to Raymond, his face a mask of apologetic cowardice. "Sir," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I'm terribly sorry, but these young people are valued regular customers. Would you be willing to relocate to one of our counter seats? It would really help us out." Raymond looked at the manager, then at the three faces behind him, glowing with smug victory. He had not survived the hell of Chosin Reservoir, had not pulled his bleeding sergeant through 2 miles of enemy fire in sub-zero temperatures, to be shuffled around a civilian diner by people who had never known a single day of genuine hardship. "I paid for my coffee," Raymond said quietly, each word measured and deliberate. "I am not causing any disturbance. I will leave when I am ready." Not a moment before, this quiet refusal was treated like an act of war. "Unbelievable," Chad exploded, throwing his hands up in theatrical frustration. "This is absolutely unbelievable. Henderson, are you going to do your job or not? Because we will take our business elsewhere, and I will personally make sure everyone knows about your establishment's policy of protecting creepy old men who harass young women." That Yelp review is going to be legendary. The threat of social media destruction was the killing blow. Henderson's face hardened with borrowed authority, the kind weak men assume when they think they have institutional power behind them. "Sir," he said, his voice now attempting sternness, "I am the manager of this establishment. I am formally asking you to vacate this booth immediately. You may relocate to the counter, or you may leave the premises entirely. The choice is yours, but you cannot remain here." The diner had gone silent. Every conversation had died. Every fork had stopped moving. Everyone was watching this public humiliation unfold. Raymond felt the weight of their stares, the burn of unearned shame. He slowly reached into his blazer's interior pocket and withdrew his worn leather wallet, preparing to pay and end this degrading spectacle with whatever dignity he could salvage. Jessica raised her phone higher, zooming in for the money shot. "Seriously, though," she said, her voice sharp with mockery, "what even are those medals? Perfect attendance at the VFW bingo night?" She pointed a manicured nail at the silver star centered on his chest. "That one looks fancy. Did you win it at a carnival? Throw the ring on the bottle?" Her words struck him, and suddenly the fluorescent lights of the diner seemed to flicker and fade. The smell of burnt coffee transformed into the acrid stench of cordite and frozen mud. Raymond wasn't sitting in a warm booth anymore. He was back on that godforsaken ridge in Korea, the temperature 40 below zero, the wind howling like a living thing trying to tear the flesh from his bones. He saw the face of Private Miller, just 18 years old, from a small town outside Columbus, his blood soaking through Raymond's field dressing faster than Raymond could apply pressure. He felt the weight of Miller's body as he dragged him through the snow, enemy machine gun fire stitching lines in the ice around them. He heard his own voice, young and desperate, and absolutely refusing to give up. "Stay with me, Miller. You stay with me, son." That's an order. The silver star wasn't a piece of metal. It was Miller's life. It was the promise Raymond made and somehow, impossibly, kept. The memory lasted only seconds, but it straightened his spine like an iron rod. He would not be broken. Not here. Not by these children who understood nothing. Across the diner, tucked into a corner booth near the restrooms, Frank Kowalski had been watching the entire ugly scene with mounting fury. Frank was 45, wearing an expensive suit, working in pharmaceutical sales. But for 2 decades, he had worn the Eagle Globe and Anchor. He had been a master sergeant in the United States Marine Corps, and he recognized something in the old man's bearing, in the patient way he endured these insults. It was the look of a man who had endured far worse and survived. When Mr. Henderson delivered his final ultimatum, Frank knew he had seen enough. This was no longer about rude college kids. This was desecration. He pulled out his phone, keeping it below table level, and scrolled through his contacts to a name most civilians would never have: Sergeant Major Thorne. The phone rang once. "Thorne," the voice answered, pure granite. "Sergeant Major, this is Frank Kowalski," Frank said, his voice dropping into the clipped cadence of military communication. "Sir, I'm at the Oak Barrel Diner on Route 9. I have a situation. There's an elderly gentleman here, VFW jacket, full rack of medals with a silver star front and center. They're throwing him out right now. Describe him," Thorne commanded. 80 plus, silver hair, steady as they come even with these punks in his face," Frank said quietly. "Sir, I think it's Gunny Clark. I think it's Raymond Clark." The silence on the line was absolute, heavy as lead. Then Thorne's voice returned, stripped of all warmth, cold as winter steel. "Are you certain, Master Sergeant?" "I'm certain, sir, and they're ejecting him as we speak." "Stay there," Thorne ordered. "Do not engage. Do not let that man leave the property if you can help it. We are 5 minutes out. The line went dead. The call ended in a Spartan office at the Marine Corps recruiting station less than 3 miles away. Sergeant Major Marcus Thorne stood up so explosively that his heavy chair shot backward and slammed into the filing cabinet with a metallic crash. His face, carved from hard experience and harder discipline, was a thunderhead of disbelief and rage. "Corporal," he barked at the young Marine working at the adjacent desk, "get the CO on the line immediately and prep 2 vehicles. 6 men, dressed blues, in the parking lot in 90 seconds or I will personally ensure they regret being born. Move." The corporal, trained to react without question, was already dialing before Thorne finished speaking. The commanding officer's voice came through sharp and alert. "What is it, Marcus?" "Sir, we have a code broken arrow situation," Thorne said, using the old unofficial term for a legend in crisis. "It's Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Clark. He's at the Oak Barrel Diner on Route 9 being harassed and forcibly removed by civilians." "My God," the CO breathed. Every Marine with any time in service knew the name. Raymond Ironheart Clark was not just a veteran. He was mythology given flesh. "What do you need?" "Sir, with respect, this is not a request," Thorne said, his voice ringing with absolute conviction. "This is a matter of institutional honor. I am taking 6 of our finest to escort a hero home." "We are rolling now. Do it, Sergeant Major," the CO replied immediately. "Get our man." Back in the diner, the final act of humiliation was reaching its crescendo. Raymond had managed to stand, his joints protesting the movement, age making itself known in ways that combat never had. He carefully placed a $5 bill on the table, more than enough to cover his coffee and a generous tip for Brenda, who had done nothing wrong. His movements were slow, deliberate, each gesture a small act of resistance against the indignity being forced upon him. Chad, swollen with his victory, was not content to simply let the old man leave. He stepped directly into Raymond's path, blocking the narrow exit from the booth. "See," he said with a triumphant sneer. "Told you this wasn't your scene, Grandpa. Maybe next time try the VA hospital cafeteria. I hear they have pudding cups and everything." Jessica giggled, her phone capturing every moment. "This is going to get so many views," she whispered to Kevin, who was nodding enthusiastically. #Boomer gets owned. #respect your elders? ? Raymond looked at the boy blocking his path. This child who had never missed a meal, never feared for his life, never held a dying friend in his arms. He said nothing. He simply prepared to step around the obstacle. And then the world changed. A deep, powerful rumble began to vibrate through the diner's foundation, starting as a bass frequency that grew steadily until the silverware began to dance on the tables and the windows rattled in their frames. Every head in the diner turned toward the large front windows. 2 gleaming black SUVs, the kind reserved for dignitaries and high-ranking officials, had pulled up directly in front of the entrance, blocking the entire street. Their engines purred with disciplined power, radiating an authority far more intimidating than any police vehicle. Then, in perfect, synchronized motion, all the doors opened simultaneously. 6 men emerged, and they were not simply men. They were embodiments of martial perfection. 6 United States Marines, standing ramrod straight in the breathtaking splendor of their dress blue uniforms, the deep navy of their jackets, the brilliant white of their belts and covers, the blood-red stripe running down their trousers. It was a vision of such disciplined beauty that it seemed to command silence from the universe itself. The sun caught the brass buttons in the mirror shine of their shoes. They moved without speaking, forming a flawless 2x3 formation on the sidewalk, their faces carved from stone. Leading them, emerging from the front passenger seat with the bearing of a man who had commanded thousands, was Sergeant Major Thorne. The bell above the diner door chimed, absurdly cheerful against the sudden electric tension. Sergeant Major Thorne entered first, his 6 Marines following in perfect lockstep, their heels striking the linoleum floor with the precise rhythm of a ceremonial drumbeat. They formed up just inside the entrance, creating a living wall of honor and intimidation. The entire diner was frozen. Forks hung suspended in midair. Conversations died in throats. Jessica's phone wavered in her suddenly trembling hand. Thorne's eyes swept the room with tactical precision. They passed over the terrified manager, dismissed the gawking patrons, and slid across the pale, confused faces of Chad and his friends as if they were meaningless furniture. Then his gaze found Raymond Clark. The granite hardness in the sergeant major's face melted away, transformed into something approaching reverence. He crossed the diner in 4 powerful strides, his path laser straight, stopping precisely 1 foot in front of Raymond. He clicked his heels together with a sharp crack. His right hand snapped up to his brow in a salute so perfect, so sharp, it seemed to slice the air itself. "Gunnery Sergeant Clark," Thorne's voice boomed, a parade ground command that filled every corner of the silent room. "On behalf of the Commandant and the entire United States Marine Corps, we apologize for this inexcusable delay. We are here to provide your escort, sir." Raymond, startled, began instinctively to straighten despite his years. As Thorne held his salute, one of the young Marines stepped forward and began to speak, his voice clear and formal. "Gunnery Sergeant Raymond Ironheart Clark," the Marine announced with unmistakable pride. 22 years of distinguished service, veteran of the Chosin Reservoir campaign, recipient of the Silver Star for conspicuous gallantry in action against an armed enemy, recipient of 2 Bronze Stars with Valor Device, recipient of 3 Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat. Sir, your actions on Hill 1282, where you held defensive positions against overwhelming enemy assault for 72 consecutive hours, directly saving your entire platoon after all officers were incapacitated, are still required study for every officer candidate at Quantico. It is an honor to stand in your presence." The diner was absolutely silent. Jessica's phone had lowered completely. The smug expression had been replaced by a mask of dawning horror. Chad's face was ash white, his mouth hanging open. He looked from the saluting sergeant major to the old man he had called a costume wearer, and perhaps for the first time in his privileged life, he understood the concept of an irreversible mistake. Sergeant Major Thorne slowly lowered his hand, but kept his eyes locked on Raymond. Then he turned his head, just enough for his gaze to fall upon the 3 students. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "You," he said, his voice a low growl that promised consequences beyond imagination. "You stand in the presence of a living legend, a man who walked through hell and bled in frozen mountains so that children like you could sit in warm diners and throw insults you're too ignorant to comprehend." He took half a step toward them. "The uniform you called a costume is a testament to honor, courage, and commitment you will never understand. The medals you mocked were paid for in blood, in sacrifice, and bravery beyond your comprehension." His glacial gaze shifted to the manager, who looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. "And you," Thorne said, his voice dripping with contempt, "you allowed this desecration in your establishment. You should carry that shame." Raymond, who had watched this unfold with weary sadness, placed a trembling hand on Thorne's powerful forearm. "Easy, Sergeant Major," he said softly. "They're just children. They don't know any better." He turned his faded eyes to the 3 students huddled together like frightened sheep. He looked at them, not with anger, but with profound pity. "Freedom isn't free," he told them quietly. "Remember that. And respect costs nothing at all." "Let's go, Gunny," Thorne said gently, his tone shifting from iron to velvet. "We'll take you wherever you want to go, sir." One Marine stepped forward and respectfully assisted Raymond with his jacket. Another walked to the table and placed a crisp $100 bill atop Raymond's 5. "For his coffee and for the trouble," the Marine said to the stunned manager. They formed a protective honor guard around the elderly veteran, a phalanx of dress blues, and escorted him toward the door. As they passed, the patrons of the Oak Barrel Diner, moved by some unspoken command, began to rise from their seats. A businessman in a 3-piece suit, a family with small children, the couple who had turned away. They all stood, and as Raymond Clark walked out into the afternoon sun, a wave of applause began, soft at first, then growing, filling the room with the sound of respect finally rendered. In the weeks that followed, Jessica's video never achieved the viral fame she had imagined. Instead, footage captured by another patron showing the 2 black SUVs, the 6 immaculate Marines, and the thunderous salute spread across the internet like wildfire. The university issued formal apologies. The 3 students became local pariahs, their faces memes for entitled ignorance. The Oak Barrel Diner changed too. A professionally printed sign appeared in the window within days. All veterans and active duty military receive 25% discount. Thank you for your service. 1 month later, Raymond stood in the canned goods aisle of his local grocery store, trying to decide between cream corn and whole kernel, when he heard a hesitant voice. "Mr. Clark, sir?" He turned to see Chad wearing a grocery store apron and name tag. The arrogance was gone, replaced by hollowed-out shame. "Sir," Chad stammered, unable to meet his eyes, "I wanted to apologize for that day. I was an ignorant fool. What I did, there's no excuse. I'm sorry." Raymond studied the genuine remorse in the young man's face. He saw not the tormentor, but a boy forced to learn a hard lesson. He gave a single, slow nod. "I know," he said softly. Then he turned back to the shelves, selected the creamed corn, and placed it in his cart. Heroes walk among us every day.